I should be better prepared. I shouldn't be surprised that it's my turn. It's just one of those days, I guess. How's everybody feeling? Good. Everybody doing all right? Are you glad you're here? Yes. I'm glad you're here today. We're going to start something new, I think. If we can, what do I need to do here? Turn it on. Again, preparation. That's okay. No, I don't want to do those today. Sorry. I don't know, I'm clicking, nothing's happening. Aha, actually we're not, it's a different title, but that's okay. Aren't you glad you came today? Jamie's not. Normally Jamie's husband Mike does it, so she's filling in, so we appreciate you. So I want to talk about this book, The Four Agreements. How many of you have heard of it or read it? One, two, a couple of you. So when I was on my sabbatical, and just so you know, and I know this is going to be earth-shattering for some of you, I read a lot of stuff. Not everything I read is quote-unquote Christian, labeled that way. Because I'm free enough and secure enough that I can look at other information and decide where it fits for me and pick what I want and throw out what I don't want, right? And so I had this experience. So let me back up and tell you why this book was important, because when I was on my sabbatical, this book really, really spoke to me. So in August, one of the things, my birthday's coming up in August, and so one of the things that I do, kind of my ritual that I've done for a while, I don't know, a few years, is I will take the month of August and I will evaluate where I have been in my life. What was the last year like for me? And so I kind of do this reflective process of looking back, trying to figure out where I am. And I do that in preparation for the fall, because around the Feast of Tabernacles, or what some would consider the Jewish New Year, I begin to think about the coming year ahead and begin to look forward. So I go through this little sort of fall ritual. My birthday's the end of August, so I take the month of August and look back, and then take September and October and begin to seek the Lord and look forward. And my problem came as I was going through and looking back. I got stuck. I actually never did get to the point where I started looking forward, and I'm like already a whole other trip around the sun, and I'm still processing stuff that started for me in August. And so my mother and father, my father lived with us the last few years of his life, and so a lot of their stuff was in our basement, whatever, and I was going through some of the stuff, and I pull up a box that was mine from my childhood, and I had a good childhood. Not complaining about anything, but, we all go through traumas, right? We all go through difficulties, and everybody's story is different, and everybody has a story they could tell. And you don't really need to know my story to understand where I'm going with this, okay? But in this box represents part of my story that I really had perhaps not wanted to look at. And so I open up this box, and when I open up this box, it's almost like a divine setup. All this emotional pain starts to come to the surface. Really, really intense emotional pain from a particular season in my life. And so I've learned to deal with emotional pain. I've actually devoted my life to studying it to try to help other people to know how to deal with it. And so one of the things that I would do, obviously, is begin to go to the Lord, and you do that in prayer, right? So I decide that I'm going to go lay down. So I lay down on my bed, and I begin to engage the Holy Spirit, and immediately I'm taken in a trance into this experience. You might call it a vision, a waking dream. How's that? And I won't give you all the details of the dream, but it was very powerful. And there was an angelic encounter that I had in that experience. And in that experience, I was taken before the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. And this being of light from God begins to talk to me. And the question began to arise about the issue of love and where the issue of love fit into my life. In particular, my ability to love myself. And there's no way for me to transmit. I can only give you a summary. I can't tell you how it happened because there's not words for how it happened, but it's almost like a download. How many of you have ever received, you've been praying or whatever, and you've just gotten this download? And I began to realize that much of my life, in fact, all of my life, had been spent trying to figure life out. And I was trying to figure life out outside of me, and here's what I mean by that. If I read enough books, so let's take, for example, I'm a leader, right? Like it or not, I'm a leader. Most days I don't like it, but it's what I am. Or so they tell me. And you all are here, so some of you at least agree with that statement, right? Some of you more than others. But and so I want to be a good leader, right? And so there was this big explosion of leadership stuff back in the early 2000s or whatever, John Maxwell, and it became a whole industry of developing leaders. And there's a lady in Harvard now who is considered the world's foremost expert on the topic, and she's written a book called The End of Leadership. And her thesis in the book, The End of Leadership, is that it didn't work. She said we wasted billions of dollars or made billions of dollars in the leadership industry, and with all the leadership teaching and principles and all the stuff that we have given out, we have more dysfunctional leaders 2 decades later than we had when we began. And so I don't know about anybody else's dysfunctional leadership, but I can look at my own dysfunctional leadership because my leadership may have been working for some of the people that were following me, but my leadership certainly wasn't working for me because I wasn't happy. And I realized that I had taken all these principles of a good leader looks like this, a bad leader looks like that, and so do these things, don't do these things, and you fill your mind with facts, and you try to remember all that stuff, and then when you're talking to somebody, you try to remember it. So, for example, you read a book on how to have a crucial conversation. You read a book on how to do confrontation in a healthy way. And so you go into the confrontation, and really, if I could be honest, I'm not in the confrontation present to the moment. I'm in the confrontation present to the book I read while the person is talking, trying to remember what they said about the issue the person was bringing up and how I'm supposed to respond to it in the most effective way. Can none of you relate to any of this? Okay, so maybe you don't do this in leadership, but maybe you do this with other things. Maybe you do this with prayer. Maybe your thing is prayer, and you're trying to remember, now, how exactly does this work when I get into prayer? I can't remember. And what exactly did they say when you get into this level of the Spirit that you're supposed to do? And all of a sudden, you're not even present to the experience. You're trying to remember what you were taught so that you can adapt and adopt and apply. Right? And I realized that stuff, all of that, and so in this experience, here's what I was being shown. All that stuff comes from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It comes from a standard outside yourself that you eat. It's a standard outside yourself of good and evil that you and I internalize, and once it becomes internalized, all kinds of stuff begins to happen inside of us. Well, look at the story. You can eat from any tree of the garden that you want to, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you cannot eat. And in the day you eat of it, you will begin to die. And our Bible, it says we'll die, but in the Hebrew, it's you'll begin to die. The death process will begin. So we get a brilliant picture right off the bat. What does the death process look like? The death process looks like this. There are all kinds of standards of good and evil outside of ourselves that we look at, that we think is going to make us wise, that we think is going to give us life, that if we're believers, we think it's going to make us like God, it's going to make us more Christ-like. And somebody offers us that fruit, who is the wisest of all of God's creatures. So somebody wise is offering us the knowledge to make us more like God. Somebody wise is offering us the knowledge, but it's outside of ourselves. Right? So what do? We eat it. We take it and internalize that. And here's what death looks like. When you internalize that knowledge of good and evil outside yourself, all of a sudden now you have a standard that you did not have before. I had no idea. I just kind of fell into pastoring. I had no idea how to pastor. I'd been to Bible school. I could tell you about the book of Hebrews. But I couldn't tell you how to stop cutting on yourself if you had a problem and wanted to cut on yourself, or I couldn't tell you how to fix your marriage, or I couldn't tell you how to, but I could lay out a chart about the rapture and tell you, hold on, baby, we're getting out of here. Keep you encouraged and hope and keep you coming back. You see what I'm saying? I didn't have a standard for what a good leader looked like, but I pick up that book, and a good leader does this. A good leader never loses his temper with the followers, because you lose respect. Now all of a sudden I have a standard, but dang, I have a temper too. So what's in me is the temper, what's outside of me is the standard, and so I get in a situation and I lose my temper and I see the look. Aren't you a pastor? Aren't you supposed to love people? And what happens when I see that look? I see that look and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I just failed miserably. Oh, I'm such a terrible leader. Oh, and a pastor too. If I was a CEO, it wouldn't matter. I'm paying people. I work with volunteers. You can't get mad at volunteers. They'll just quit on you. They have no reason to keep coming back. Oh, now I'm going to have to do all that stuff myself. I'm ashamed of my leadership. So I better cover it up. I don't want that to happen again. I better find another book. What to do in times when you get angry. Count to 10. Think happy thoughts. Do heart math. Right? Now I have a new standard. Huh? Yes. Then I have a new standard. Then I have a new standard. I was just getting ready to click it too. No, I'm not. Do you see what I'm saying? So as this process was unfolding, somebody put this book in my hands. This is a really long introduction, but it does tie into my message about how to make agreements to get yourself out of that place. Really, it's a book that teaches us how our experience, how our love for ourselves and for other people becomes conditioned, and how to get out of that conditioning so that you can experience unconditional love. Or we could say from a Christian perspective, how to quit killing yourself at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because this is what death looks like. I don't measure up, so now I've got to cover myself. You see what I'm doing? That's where I was. I lost my train of thought. No, it's okay. Yeah, don't do that again. And I expect you to submit. She's my wife, for those of you that don't know. That's why I expect her to submit. But anyway, no. Because we went to that marriage seminar. Oh, God, how to have a good marriage. Somebody wrote an article. I loved it. They were all upset with Eugene Peterson because of some comments that he made. The guy that wrote the Message Bible? Because some comments he made, and everybody was all upset in the Christian community because that's what we do. And the wolves came out, and they said, oh, we're going to pull your, we're not going to give you any more money and all this stuff. And so he retracts, and they said, and his publishing company, they didn't agree with what he said, and so they were going to take away his livelihood. Isn't that nice? We don't like what you said, so we're going to take your livelihood away from you. That's how we do it. But anyway, so they said, we believe in a biblical view of marriage. And so somebody wrote a blog, and they said, really? Because a biblical view of marriage and family is polygamy? Oh, come on. The Song of Solomon. Oh, here we go. See? Already disrupting the apple cart. Everybody uses the Song of Solomon as a manual for marriage written by a man. Proverbs 31 woman. Come on. How many of you ladies, I want to be the Proverbs 31 woman? So we get our marriage and family advice from a guy who had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Solomon wrote the Song of Solomon, and he wrote the book of Proverbs. 700 wives, 300 concubines. No wonder he understood a thing or two about how to live with a woman. Okay, so... Right? Okay, so moving right along from that. How did I get off on that? Oh, because we went to the marriage conference, and the marriage conference told us how to be a good husband, how to be a good wife, how to have a good family, how to raise good children. So now here's more things that we got to do. So we go to the Love and Logic class and learn how to raise our kids, and then our kids don't act like the illustrations. It always works so great in the illustration when the teacher's telling us and you're sitting there saying, oh yes, this is wisdom. Oh yes, this is desirable to make us better parents. Oh yes, let's take it home, and we buy the books and we buy the videos and we come home with stacks of them, and we're going to become the perfect love and logic parents. And 3 months later, we and you do good for a day or two and you're patient, okay, I'm learning this. And then by day 3, it's like, man, my kids, they're not fitting the pattern here. They're not fitting the illustration. I tried what they said I was supposed to do. Oh, I'm such a terrible parent. I didn't even know I was a bad parent until I saw Love and Logic. Because I didn't have a standard to judge myself. Love and Logic is a great thing, by the way. It is. It's a wonderful thing. But you get 2-3 months down the road, and you realize I'm not loving and I'm not being very logical. Because you know what, sometimes my 5-year-old's more logical than I am. Can I just be really transparent? I might as well. I'm airing all my dirty laundry anyways. So somewhere one of my kids picked up the F word. Yeah, that one. And like your fear, like seriously, like the anxiety dream of the pastor, is that your kid's going to go to Sunday school or the Christian school that you enrolled them in, where you do chapel for the kids at least once a month. You come in and tell Bible stories. Like your anxiety dream is the kid's going to walk into Sunday school and teach the other children the F word. And then that child's going to go home to their parent and say the F word. Where did you hear that? How many saw the Christmas Story? You remember the phone call? How many saw the phone call when the kid says the F word? Where'd you hear that? I heard it from Schwartz. He heard it from his dad in the story. But he put it off on one of his friends, and mom calls him up, and then, did you know what your son taught my son? And I'm going to be the receiver of that phone call because my kid's saying the F word. And he's 4. So I pull him aside and I say, son, we don't want you using that word. And so I'm trying to be logical because love and logic. Is that a bad word, Daddy? Well, yes, it's a bad word. So only bad people say it. Well, it's not really true that only bad people say that word. I said, but people won't, people are going to look at you. They're not going to like you. They're not going to look at you, a right way if that comes out of your mouth. That's just, you don't want people to think bad of you. Oh, so we're supposed to do things so that other people think good about us. So in other words, I'm teaching him now to be a people pleaser. So I'm like, yeah, that didn't work either. So by the time the conversation's over, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, why don't we say the F word? So I don't get it. I have absolutely no idea. Where are those Love and Logic videos? I'm not trying to offend you, but I promise you that's an illustration you'll remember. What'd your pastor talk about today? So now I'm a bad parent, or he's a bad child. And so this whole process, that's what death looks like. That's what, in the day you eat of it, you're going to die. That's what it looks like. You take this external knowledge because you think it's going to impart wisdom to you. And the most amazing thing was God brought all the animals to Adam before he ate at the tree of knowledge to see what he would call them. God told him to take care of the garden before he had any knowledge, and he was able to take care of the garden. But he hadn't eaten at that tree yet. How did he do that? How did he know what to call the animals without eating at the tree of knowledge? How did he know how to tend the garden without eating at the tree of... And so the book is all about how to break out of those spells, how to get away from eating at the tree of knowledge and stop that death process so that you can get to the tree of life. All right, so where do we learn stuff? how does this function in our daily lives? It functions the moment we come on the planet. Just think about this. When God created Adam, he made him from the dust of the ground, and he breathed into him the breath of life, and Adam became, we call it a living soul, but you could also say a living being, right? And so that story's there to help me understand where I fit in the world, right? And so where do I fit in the world? So the first thing I got to understand is my body is simply a product of this earth. It's my body that gives me the right to be here. It's my body and it's the earth that sustains that body. It's the oxygen that I breathe. It's the plants that take my carbon dioxide and turn the carbon dioxide that I exhale back into oxygen. It's the food from the plants that grow in the ground or from the animals that allow me to function here, but it's not who I am. And my body will change depending on my discipline, depending on my eating habits, depending on which tree looks really, okay, anyway. But it's not who I am. God breathed into that body a breath of life, and Adam became an animated being. So there is something that comes. There's really what I am is I'm a breath from God. I'm a breath from God, and because God is eternal, his breath is eternal. And so there's an animating energy inside of me, inside this body that's the real me. This body's not the real me, but there's an animating energy. There's a God energy that's been put inside of me. And that's really the story. In fact, God said to Adam, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let him rule, let him have dominion, let him have authority over and rulership over the earth, right? So let's put God inside this dust and teach him how to be God. Teach him how to be God to the animals. Teach him how to be God to the birds. Teach him how to be God to the plants. Teach him how to be God to the crickets. I just noticed the cricket. Huh. He's singing praise, Julie said. Do you get it? And so that helps me understand who I am. So I'm not this body. I'm a force of energy. And so, but here's the other thing I am. I am a center point of consciousness. I'm a center point of experience. Really, I'm a center point of experience for the divine. That God takes part of himself and locates himself spatially and then puts it inside of me so that he can experience what I experience. He can know what I know. Oh. Do you see it? So I'm this center point of, so August 30th of some year, a few years back, I was born. I won't tell you when because I'm not going to let that number define me. And I come into this earth as a point of consciousness, and I've got to learn, right? I come with something. I come prepackaged with something, but I have to begin to learn. And so the first place I begin to learn is in my family. And so my family begins to teach me what it's like what's expected of me. What's right, what's wrong, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And they're hoping I will internalize it. And so before long, I learned what a good boy is, and I learned what a bad boy is. And how do they do that? How do we do that, parents? And this is why Love and Logic is really helpful, because Love and Logic teaches you how not to do this. But for most of us, we were raised through reward and punishment. And punishment usually involved pain, right? So we were taught the rules by pain. So the reality is that our love was conditioned. We were loved conditionally. If you'll do this, I'll love you. If you don't do this, I'm ashamed of you. I'm disappointed in you. I'm angry at you. I will hurt you. If you do this, I'll make you feel good. If you do that, I'm going to hurt you. Therefore, my love is conditional. And I'm literally going to condition you to be what I think you should be. All of us, come on parents, now here's the thing. Do not take this as fruit of the tree of knowledge and go home and say, oh, I've messed up my kids. Pastor told me today I've messed up my kids because I used punishment. I'm telling you what, you got to keep that kid out of the street some way. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know, maybe you're the perfect parent, but every day I'm humbled by a first grader and a kindergartner. So somebody asked me if I wanted to, because with my degrees and stuff, asked me if I want to come take a job in a school, and I finally responded to them just recently. You want to come work for us, the school district, for a year. I'm like, nope. I have a kindergartner and a first grader that kick my butt every day. And that's only 2. I couldn't imagine a whole classroom full of them. So don't take this and go home and say, oh, I messed up my kids. That's not the point of this. The point is, this is the way the world works. And all of us have to figure out our way through this world. Because we live in a world that is based on conditional love. And the whole point of discipleship is for us to get outside of that conditioning so that we can return to our God self and begin to both experience unconditional love and give unconditional love. That's the whole point. That's the whole journey. That's the whole ascension right there. School, we already kind of talked about. Church, we learn how to behave in church. My kids were not behaving very well in church today. I don't know if you saw them. No, because this is what I was taught. This is now, again, you got to have a good children's ministry if you want to build a church. Right? So we go to the tree of knowledge. How do we get a good children's ministry? We heard about this church has really phenomenal praise and worship, so we go down there and all the kids are down front and all the kids got their hands up and they're engaging and they're worshiping God and whatever. And so I look over today and you think, oh, I want that for my child. I want that for my church, but I want that for my child. So we start domesticating them on how they're supposed to be in the house of God. Right? And I guarantee you, whatever it is, whatever it's supposed to look like when you're the pastor's kid, you're not supposed to be dealing at the front of the sanctuary. Because I don't know how many of you saw Elijah, but we keep these little breath mints in here, mostly for our ministry team and mostly for me, so I don't kill you when you come up to talk to me afterwards. And so here's all the kids around my son, and he's opened it up, and he's opened up the pill box, and he's handing them out. They're just mints. During worship. Yeah, he's multiplying the loaves and fishes. But see, that's her rule book. In her rule book, that works great. In my rule book, that doesn't work because I was taught, they need to be setting the example for the rest of the kids because they're leaders after all, because they were born in our household. So my rule book functions differently. So I can try to condition them to my rule book and go so far as to say, it's a sin to not be engaging in worship, singing and having your hands raised in the presence of God. How disrespectful in the house of God. That's a sin. Because I want him to behave a certain way. Same church where they had this ministry going, the pastor told me that he started spanking his kids at an early age if they didn't worship. He'd take them home and spank them because they were being disrespectful to God. I thought, yeah, let me get just clean your plate down and pick up your socks and quit saying the F word. Yeah, you're spanking them because they're worshiping. I'm trying to get my kid to just quit saying the F word. Okay, anyway. All this functions through agreements. What does that say up there? How do you know that? Somebody taught you that. How do you know that H is O is O and L is O? And how do you know that? Because somebody told you, right? So you made an agreement that an H, that if you take a pencil and you make two horizontal, or two, what are those, vertical lines? Two vertical lines. I flunked geometry. I just was miserable at it. Take two vertical lines and put a horizontal line in there. That's an H, and it makes this sound. And so we have an agreement as a society. And when we say Holy Bible, that's why how many of you know other people will use the term Bible to talk about different things? So we call it the Holy Bible to set it apart, right? So we have an agreement. So if I say holy Bible, it allows us to operate and function in this world. And we operate and function in this world through our agreements. My name has nothing to do with who I am. I am not Aaron Tomlinson. I'm not. Aaron Tomlinson is the name my parents gave me, and it's a label that I use that allows me to function in the world, but it has nothing to do with who I am. It's an agreement that I have agreed to. I could go down to the courthouse, and I could have my name changed to Fred Smith. I could do that, however long it takes the paperwork, and then they got to prove that I'm not trying to hide something or run for something or really not pay taxes or whatever. And I do all that stuff, right? And then I can walk out there with a new agreement that says I'm Fred Smith. And then I just have to break the habit of responding to Aaron. Let's just suppose I decided to do that. Let's just suppose I come in one day and I say, I'm no longer Aaron Tomlinson, I'm Fred Smith. And the first day I start using Fred, how many times do you think I'm going to respond to that? Hey, Fred. And if I change the agreement that strongly, when people say Aaron, I'm gonna, oh, that's me, because I've become conditioned to respond to that sound. And somebody put a YouTube video up about a substitute teacher who was taking roll, and there was Aaron, and that person ruined my life. How many of you have seen that? Oh, you guys. There was a video that went viral about the substitute teacher calling people out by their names and pronouncing them wrong. And one of them was Aaron. And for a month or two, everywhere I went, I'm in security at the airport getting on the airplane, and like, I'm tortured by this thing. I'm like, and the security guard says, here you go, Aaron. And everybody thinks they're being funny. It's like there's thousands of you that have all seen this. And I hear this 15 times a day, and it wasn't funny the first time. Here you go, Aaron. So I'm going to change my name to Fred Smith. But see, I'm conditioned to respond to Aaron. So I have to change my conditioning, but I didn't choose that name. I didn't come out of the womb and they said, what would you like to be called? But if I wanted to change it, I could. Changing the name would be easy. It's breaking the conditioning that becomes difficult. So what you begin to realize is that almost everything that you do comes from an agreement that you did not make, but you chose. That you did not originate, but you chose. And you conditioned yourself to respond to that agreement. Right? And so what we end up with is this whole internalized rule book. See, I know what it means to be a good husband because I went to the marriage conference. I did this. This was my Christian experience. I knew what it was to be a good husband because I went to the marriage conference. I knew what it meant to be a good father because I went to the parenting conference. I knew what it meant to be a good pastor because I went to the church growth conference. I knew what it meant to be a good Christian because I went to church every Sunday and they told me. And so pretty soon, that whole thing becomes internalized until I have this rule book that I live by. And so I've got all these rules that I have to, that I've agreed to and that I've got to follow, right? But what happens when I don't follow them? Well, when I was little and I didn't follow them, there was somebody there judging my behavior and punishing my behavior. Don't daydream during class. Pay attention. Because if you're daydreaming, I can't program you to think like me. So give up on your dreams and let me internalize you with my dreams. But I want the freedom to daydream. Well, now you lose your recess. Now you have to go to detention. I hate school. Well, now we're going to make you stay an extra hour because you didn't do it our way. See, this is the source of all our emotional pain. And see, we do this in the church because really, like we compete over who's the smartest or who's the most anointed. Like there's one verse in the Bible that talks about fivefold ministry, and there have been millions of books written about it. So I am the apostle, therefore I am anointed. And basically, because if I want to, here's the thing. If I want you to do something for me, and you say no, I say, Sherry, I want you to come sit up here by Julie, and she says, no. I said, but Sherry, I really want you to come sit up here by Julie. No. I can try to persuade her, realizing that I have to honor her choice. I disrespect her, I dishonor her if I don't honor her choice. But I really want her up here by Julie, and she's saying no. So I can say, but it's a really comfortable seat. I sit in it every Sunday. And yeah, Julie took a shower and she smells really nice. And she doesn't even get angry anymore. And she's not going to judge you. She's a really nice person. And she might decide, yes, but she made the choice. But she may say, nope. So if I want to dominate her, if I want to control her, how do I get her to move? Well, one of the ways I can do it is make her doubt herself and believe in me. And one of the ways I can do that is start talking about my superior anointing, my superior mystical experiences, my superior intellect, my superior knowledge of the Bible, my superior knowledge of how things are supposed to be. And so I'm the apostle, I'm the pastor, I'm the miracle worker, you see how this works in church? I know more than you, so eat this fruit. So that really, can I tell you really what a lot of happens in church is we just share our bondage and spread our death. Okay, it's not just church, gang. It happens in families. It happens in schools. I'm just using church as an example because we're all here, right? It's all part of our shared collective experiences. I didn't grow up in your family. I don't know what your family was like. So I'm drawing on our shared collective experiences. I'm not trying to be critical. Do you see it? So that pretty soon we internalize a rule book. You don't speak out. You don't question the authority. You don't speak out against God's anointed. And so you live with all this self-doubt, right? But you have this rule book that you keep inside, and you make sure you follow the rules. And then you internalize this judge. Like, if there's a rule book, there has to be a judge that keeps everything in line, right? But no longer is that judge my parent, and no longer is that judge my teacher because I'm an adult now. Really, the truth is I'm in the prime of life. And so are you. Because you're never this is the youngest you'll ever be. You'll never be younger than this, right? And so the reality is that the world, we've got a lot of choices that we can make. We have an infinite amount of possibilities of how we choose to experience life. And we can make any choice we want to make. I can go change my name to Fred Smith. Julie, another story on my kids. I'm telling my kids a lot today, but we went to the Museum of Natural History. And Josiah goes really slow, and he wants to look at everything. And Elijah's like, man, let's get out of here and on to something else. So we leave him at the fossil exhibit. Josiah's like, wow, this is a remnant of a dinosaur. And he's really into the dinosaurs, and the reptiles. And so he's like, wow, this is a remnant, And Elijah's like, yeah, that's a rock. I see those at home. Let's move on, right? So we get separated. So like 20 minutes later, so we leave them at the fossil exhibit with the lady there from the museum, handing out the fossils to the kids, letting them touch them, whatever. And Elijah and I move on, and he's flying through that place. So 20 minutes later, we're done with the whole museum. And I get this text, they're still at the fossils. And how do I know they're still at the fossils? Because my phone goes off and I look at it and it's a text from Julie Tomlinson and it says, OMG, Josiah just broke one of the fossils. And I looked at my phone that said Aaron Tomlinson, and I thought, I'm Fred Smith. I'm going to text back, I don't know who Aaron is. I found his phone. Why? Because if you broke the apostle, I'm going to be punished. See, this process is the root of most of the fear in our life. I'm going to do something wrong, and if I do something wrong, I'm going to be punished, and I don't want to experience that pain, so I'm afraid to make a different choice. So I'm going to stay in my box. I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm going to stay in my circle because I don't want to be punished. And we do it to ourselves so that we have an internal rule book, and then we have an internal judge that keeps us in line to make sure we follow the rules. And I'm pretty sure somewhere in the rules it says the pastor's kid doesn't say the F word, and the pastor's kid doesn't break the fossil at the museum. You see it? But if there's a part of us that's doing the judging internally, when we break the rules, there's got to be a part of us that receives the judgment. That it becomes the convict, right? Convict. Or becomes the victim. And what happens to convicts? Right? You get punished. So we internalize a process of rules, judgment, victimization, punishment, and pain that we keep perpetuating internally that is killing us because it robs us of the choices that God has given us to go out and experience the infinite amount of possibilities that we can have in our lives. I'm of the mindset anymore, I do not believe, and I know this goes against what I was teaching last year, sort of. I have to tweak it a little bit. I do not believe God has one destiny, one calling, one idea about my life and what I'm supposed to be, and that is a pastor. So if somebody offers me a job at a school, I'm not sitting there saying, oh, if I take that job at the school, then I'm going to be, going against the will of God for my life. I mean, I heard early on, if you're called to ministry, I remember hearing this. If you're called into ministry and you live your whole life as a shoe salesman and you stand before God on Judgment Day, God is not going to judge you as a shoe salesman. He's going to judge you based on the calling that He gave you and whether or not you fulfilled it. And so if you think you're called and then you think you got to do all these things because we have this crazy thing in the church that we call the prophetic, that hooks our ego, which is just another form of control. Oh, you're going to go to nations. You're going to touch the world. Thousands of people are going to be saved through your ministry. And I'm thinking, as a young man, wow, this is my purpose. This is my destiny. And then 20 years later, I'm like still talking to 100 people. And so what happens? I take that external image and I begin to beat up on myself and think, I must have missed God. I must have misstepped somewhere. I must have done something wrong somewhere. And maybe I'm really unhappy. I'm not, but maybe I was a few months ago, but it's over. Maybe and you have Don Miguel Ruiz to thank, but anyway, for me coming back, the guy that wrote the book. So what if I change and go into the school district and start doing something different? Well, then God's going to judge me, because you see it? But see, I don't believe that anymore. I think God put Adam in the garden and said, see all these trees? You can freely eat from any of these trees. See all these animals? Whatever you want to call them, that's what they can be. That's what they can become. Go out and live life. Go out and explore. Go out and learn things by experience. Go, taste that fruit. Maybe you like plums and maybe you like peaches better, but you have to taste it first. And we grew up in a world that doesn't want us to go out and taste, doesn't want us to go out and experience. Taste and see that the Lord, He is good. Well, what else are you tasting? To even know if God is good. So that for all of us, we have, no matter what your age, you can make different choices tomorrow and start living and exploring and experiencing this life. When I was in the airport in Phoenix, it's funny how God was setting me up. When I was in the airport in Phoenix, we're at a restaurant, in the airport, and it's packed. And so I'm standing by this guy, and we both put in for one. And she comes back to us, and she says, look, I've got a table for two. Do you guys mind sitting together? And he looks at me, do you mind? No, I don't mind. So we sit down and we're having lunch, and I start talking to this guy, and he's about 10 years older than me, and I'm going through my midlife crisis thinking, I don't know if I want to do this the rest of my life. But I'm in bondage to it. Because I've done this, and how am I going to make a change, and what am I going to do differently, and I'm too old, I'm too old, I'm too old, I'm too old. That was my agreement in my head, right? So this guy starts telling me about 10 years ago, he went through his midlife crisis. Now listen to this. This guy went and got a PhD in astrophysics and was a professor at one of the Ivy League schools in the Northeast. And he said, I just decided I wanted to fly. He said, I'm a pilot now. You're a pilot? How'd you become a pilot? Well, this is how I've gotten the story. How'd you become a pilot? Well, I was a professor, and I was 38 years old, and I sat there and I looked at it and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. He said, I don't like spending my life with kids and in an office, college kids, and in an office, whatever. And so I went and took flying lessons. And I enjoyed flying so much that I decided I wanted to be a pilot. Now here's the deal. He left his career, and he said, I couldn't get on the commercial airlines, but I was able to get on this firm where we fly private clients around to different places. So I just flew some CEO of some company up to Seattle to look at something, and we stayed a few days, and then I flew him back, and now I'm flying home. And my wife got mad at me. Watch this. My wife got mad at me because she was also an academic, she was also a professor, and she didn't want me to leave that world. So I left her. And my brother, he must come from a brilliant family, my brother created the algorithm for like eharmony.com or so. It wasn't one of those, but it was one of the big ones. The algorithm to figure out compatibility. And so I was one of the first ones to try it out. He had me try it out. And I found the love of my life. She lives in Seattle. I lived in New Jersey. But we've been together about 3 years, and I'm just as happy as I could be. She's just as happy as she could be. And she's going to stay there, I'm going to stay in New Jersey, and we're buying a house in Phoenix so that we can make this work for us. Wait a minute, that doesn't fit marriage. Marriage means you live in the same house. Hell, we were taught marriage meant you didn't even have separate bank accounts because you were one flesh. So if you have separate bank accounts, your wife's too independent, she needs to submit. I went to a counselor, just last little story here. I went to a counselor. We went for premarital counseling. Thank you, Tony and Michelle. They were smart enough to send us to a professional. And he gave us a compatibility test. Best advice, best premarital advice I got, the only thing I remember. He gave us this thing, so like my personality, how many of you have done the Myers-Briggs stuff? Like introvert, extrovert, all that stuff. So I was the kind that makes the least amount of money. The personality type. Because I don't care about that stuff. And consequently, I was also the personality type that spends the most amount of money. So Houston, we have a problem, right? And Julie's ideal, at that point in her life, when she was locked into that personality, her ideal career was, I was locked into a personality that was headed for the street. I don't care if I make it, but I'm sure going to spend it. And she was locked into a personality type where her number one compatible job that came up was accountant. So he gave us the best advice we could have. Have a joint account, give her the checkbook, let her tell you how much you can spend. That's great for me. I mean, I did not follow the agreements in my math classes. That's why I don't know a vertical line from a horizontal line. Or is it a vertical line from a horizontal line? I forget. So I'm like, phew, I don't have to deal with numbers. I don't have to balance a checkbook. She just gives me an allowance. I can spend it. I get to enjoy spending all the money, and I don't care about making it. So if it's not there, hey, we'll find something else fun to do. Until I had a preacher tell me, if your wife runs the checkbook, she's wearing the pants in the family, and you need to be the man of God and step up and balance the checkbook. And she said, nope. I said, yes, but you have to submit. And she said, no. And I went back to the pastor. I said, she said, no. He said, well, then you're not enough of a man in that house. And so now I'm back in the cycle of I'm not following the rule book. I'm judging myself. I'm punishing myself. I don't know. God thought enough of me to give me the parts of a male. Pretty sure that's what makes me a man. Last time, anyway, moving on. Jeez. Whatever you do, don't say, never mind. All right. So here's the point. It takes courage. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to get out of this cycle and to begin to live your life. It's one of the most exciting things you can do. It's one of the most adventurous things you can do. And it's one of the most liberating and empowering things that you could do. But it's scary as hell. Because punishment and pain is what conditioned you. So to challenge that conditioning is to confront your emotional pain. I can promise you, if you start challenging this conditioning, you will have to confront your emotional pain. And it's that pain internally that you do to yourself that will prevent you from breaking out of your patterns so that you can experience maybe a happier life, maybe a funner life, maybe a more joyful life. Well, God doesn't necessarily want you to be happy. I don't believe that. I believe joy is one of the fruits of the Spirit. Yes, but that's independent of your circumstances. And I can see it's working really well for you. It's really about shattering the rule book, shattering those images, those things that have conditioned and governed your life. Really, what you're doing is you're rebelling against conditional love. And you're saying, I'm going to go all in on unconditional love. And it's unconditional love, actually, that heals the wounds. So here's the process. You decide I'm breaking out, and the moment you begin to break out of your conditioning, you're going to have, the next thing you're going to have to do is confront pain. You're going to have to confront the pain and the abuse that you've been doing to yourself. And you're going to have to confront the pain and the abuse that you've agreed to that you allow other people to do to you. I was spiritually abused because I agreed to the fact that someone else should be telling me how to live my life. They knew better for me than I did. So I would go against things that I felt I wanted to do because the one in authority said God said. But nobody can abuse you without your permission. You will only allow someone to abuse you a little bit less than you abuse yourself. When someone begins to abuse you more than you abuse yourself, you walk away. But you'll tolerate just a little bit less from other people what you already are doing to yourself. So you have to confront all that pain. But here's the beauty of it. In that process, as you begin to confront that pain, there you begin to discover the most beautiful gift in the world. And that is unconditional love. That comes from God, but that you give to yourself. It's like God says, I love you enough. You and I are unconditionally loved by God every day. And you know how we know? Because we're breathing. And every breath is a gift from on high. And he causes it to rain on the just and the unjust. And can I tell you, I consume the benefits of that rain on the unjust because there's a lot of ways in my life that I'm unjust. And so even when I'm unjust, God loves me unconditionally. He's given that to me every moment of my life. So that's not the issue. The issue is whether I can receive that love and I can transfer it from myself to myself. So that when I confront the conditioning, so see, here's the process. Back to my story in August. I'm looking at where I've been, where am I in my life is the sum total of where I've been conditioned to be, where I've agreed to be. And if I wake up and realize I'm unhappy like I was doing in August, I can realize I can change the agreements. I can change the conditioning. But all of a sudden there's pain there. And when I didn't try to hide the pain, but I entered into the pain, I saw it. It took a very supernatural experience for me to see it, granted. But I saw it. It was the conditioning that was causing my pain. So could I let go of my conditioning, confront my pain, in order that I could come to the place of experiencing and being able to give unconditional love. And that, my brothers and sisters, takes one element that God can give you, and it's called courage. You got to be willing to stand up to those bears in your life. You got to be willing to embrace uncertainty. You've got to be willing to embrace the unknown. You've got to be willing to embrace your pain. And in all of that, you're embracing yourself with unconditional love. Let's bow our heads. Lord, thank you for your people. Thank you for your constant love for us. Thank you for the stories that are embedded in the ancient texts of the scriptures that can speak so powerfully and come so alive to us and can be so helpful for us. And so, Father, I thank you. Each one of us are on this journey in a different place. And I pray it's something that I said today that we'll be able to take, that will spark something, not that they internalize that comes from me, but that it will affirm or it will spark something that's already inside of them and fan that spark into flame. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.